Representative Kenner. Representative Larson.
Here.
Representative Schwartz. Representative Simpson.
Here.
Representative Stith.
Here.
Representative Walters.
Here.
Chairman Nicholas.
Let's do a referral sent file 8. Any public comment? Any public comment? You got any questions? Tell us what you want to happen with us. Why?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Josh Shorb. I'm representing the Wyoming Weed and Pest Council. I'm also with Park County Weed and Pest. This bill would transfer the management of noxious weed and pest on state trust lands from OSLI to the Department of Ag. It also restores, it puts $300,000 into the budget for the next biennium. As I understand it, I don't think there's any weed and pest money for control of noxious weeds and pests on state lands right now. This bill would accomplish that. So after the 1st of July, there'd be no money to continue on those projects that have been going on in the past. So we could leave big holes in a lot of the projects that are out there that have been worked on for over the decades, because we wouldn't have money for control on state lands for stuff like cheatgrass, leafy spurge, venata, Medusa head, stuff like that. And this would help consolidate a lot of different programs that the Department of Ag already runs, weed and pest programs, and this would bring it under there and kind of help streamline the management of that and the different grant programs that are out there, or pots of state money that are available through the different registration fee grants and things like that.
So in the past, we've always had not always, but oftentimes we've had an appropriation request from OSLI to spray weeds on state lands. And we understand that there's also a responsibility of the lessee to contribute there and do that. So is this going to take the need for that funding away? Will OSLI still be responsible for funding control of weeds on state lands, or are you guys going to handle that through a different budget? Tell me how that's going to work.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, the state lands would still be responsible for funding it. The Department of Ag, the State Allocations Committee, they would be responsible in consultation with the state lands on which projects that they would fund. The landowner, the lessee would still be involved in those projects, and they would still have to fund their share of the programs. And this Senate amendment that was put in here would also require a 1-to-1 match for all these programs. So it kind of double the state's money. So for every $1 that would be spent out of this on state lands, there'd have to be another dollar match to that, whether that's from the lessee, the weed and pest districts, private foundation money, different grant programs like the registration fee grant, stuff like that.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We look on page 3, $258,000 is appropriated from the school foundation program account for weed treatment on schools lands. Was that something that your organization has a strong feeling about? Should it come from the school foundation program account, or could the entire appropriation come from the general fund? Or do you care?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Walters, I guess we don't really have an opinion on that. As my understanding of it, I'm not a budget wonk. I don't know that stuff as well as you guys do. That $300,000, I think it did come out of general fund before, and then the Senate amendment, brought it out of the school foundation program. And then that division, there was $300,000 put in there. The $258,000, that was an idea brought forth by OSLI to treat the revenue generating lands. The other 42,000, I think that represents 86% of their lands. The other 14%, which would equate out to 42,000 of this, was for their non-revenue generating lands. I don't know if that's vacant leases, administrative sites. I'm not sure what that would be, and that would not require a 1-to-1 match.
So I think we've done that in the past to say that if the revenues from these school sections are going to schools ought to cover the cost. Because I think the way we've done that some in the past, and we've done it general fund. My question on the matches is, so if you had a a section there that, and you're requiring a 1-to-1 match. There's no other matches there, except for the lessee, and the lessee says pound sand. It's not my requirement of my lease to do this weed spraying then, or you're just not going to spray the weeds?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, I think the weeds or pests would be sprayed. Either the districts have to come up with it, the districts would have to find money through other sources, or I think if the lessee didn't participate in it, I think it'd be a tough program to sell, but right now they have to participate that either way already they have to have some skin in the game.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
question. So under a practical application, then, right now, you do not have the authority to just literally go on to state lands, say it's a school section, and perform noxious weed control. But under this bill, you would, correct? If you see a problem child, you literally have the authority to go in and on state lands to do that.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Simpson, I don't believe this bill authorizes that, and I don't think we have that authority right now to do that. There has to be a contract signed between like the district and the OSLI right now, and then there's an agreement between the district and the lessee to form some type of a program, in conjunction with those guys. I guess if the state land said, we have an issue over here, can this district go and take care of this? That can happen, but I don't think weed and pest districts don't just go out there and just spray here or there without some type of consultation or agreement with either the lessee or with the OSLI personnel directly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further questions? Any more public comment? Seeing none, we will close public comment. We have a motion.
Move the bill do pass, Mr. Chairman.
Do pass by Representative Walters, seconded by Representative Larson. Discussion? I think your amendment needs to probably come from the floor. Okay,
Question on the bill.
roll call.
Representative Kinner,
Aye.
Representative Larson,
Aye.
Representative Schwartz, Representative Simpson,
Aye.
Representative Stiff,
Aye.
Representative Walters,
Aye.
Chairman Nicholas.
All right,
All ayes do
thanks for
pass.
being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome.
Tell that Mike Willie to send all the leafy spurge up to part-time.
Keep on the weeds, guys. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, next. Let's do Senate File 73 real quickly.
Mike, here, you want to go back 106? Or you need Christian for that?
Yeah, we got 106 guys there.
Well, we can go to 106 if you want.
I just seen Mike.
Okay, let's do 106.
Mike?
First turn.
Trying to find him.
Oh,
Perfect.
perfect time. Oh. We'll send it another clock.
We'd appreciate a few token comments.
Small token of our appreciation.
Go ahead, Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee. Again, our apologies about not being able to be here or even knowing this was happening last time, but we appreciate the opportunity to hold over and come back and visit regarding the Wyoming Stable Token Act. And Mr. Chairman, I did have some folks that wanted to provide public testimony. They're targeting more like 1 o'clock. I'll try and text them in a few minutes when others are providing comment and see if we can get them up here. They're just down that road, so it wouldn't take them long to get here. But with regard to the Stable Token Act, I don't know how much you went through previously, so I'll go over the concept of it. The difference between a token and a coin in cryptocurrency is the token is representative of ownership of an asset, where a coin is the asset itself. This is very specifically a stable token act because it is representative of ownership of a US dollar. And you'll see that language very carefully as you look at page 3. So we've got some definitions if you're curious about those, but page 3, 4031-103, the Wyoming stable token authorized in value, is first of all directing the treasurer is authorized to issue Wyoming stable tokens as provided for in this act. And then the B provision, which is essential, is a Wyoming stable token is a virtual currency representative of and redeemable for a United States dollar held in trust by the state of Wyoming as provided by Wyoming statute. So you have a digital representation of the dollar that's held in trust. And that digital representation, since it is a cryptocurrency, a virtual currency, allows you to operate and engage on blockchain and through blockchain transactions. So you have near instantaneous transaction capacity. You have the ability to engage in smart contracts. And obviously a lot of what we've been working on for the past 5-6 years through the Blockchain Task Force and Select Committee has been trying to facilitate those types of financial transactions. But some don't want to be doing them with volatile cryptocurrencies. Some want to be engaging in transactions with effectively US dollars. This provides that opportunity, first of its kind in the country, first of its kind in the world. There are other entities that are looking at it. In fact, the European Union is very seriously looking at issuing a digital euro, which would have exactly the same types of characteristics, so that there can be engagement directly with the euro. The Federal Reserve is also looking at issuing a Federal Reserve coin. It's probably not going to happen anytime soon. So we'll be waiting on the Fed to allow this type of capacity and activity, where instead of doing that, we could be the first mover, and there are potential advantages for us to be that first mover. So you see, Mr. Chairman, that on bottom of page 3 on to 4, the duties of the treasurer is to provide consultation and adopt rules and regulations as necessary. But then in the C provision are some extensive provisions of flexibility that you see through Romanet 7, because realistically, while we know what this canon should look like, there needs to be a lot of flexibility because there would be a lot that we would want to be partnering on through this issuance. We would need to find partners that could develop this token. And those partners are out there and I think willing and interested. In fact, we'd probably have to be fighting them off. Who wants to partner with us on the first government issued stable token? I think we'd have our choice of partners on that.
Mr. Chairman, stopping you there, how would you decide who to partner with? Or would you accept multiple partners for an adventure like this?
Those are exactly the kind of discussions that I think we should have. I mean, personally, and this is just my inclination, you may well want a stable token that works on multiple blockchains, at which point you would probably want multiple partners. That would be advantageous just from the compatibility standpoint and engaging in a multitude of smart contracts. That would also give us some interesting advantages relative to other stable coins, which are already in existence. But those coins, unlike this token, are probably backed by the dollars that they say they're backed by. But there's a lot of advantage to having a government that's holding those in trust relative to some entities that theoretically have the $180-ish billion worth of market capital in areas of confidence. So Representative Walters, it's an excellent question. And that selection process, again, needs some flexibility for who is willing to partner with us and what the advantages would potentially be. There are really only a small number of blockchains and cryptocurrencies that have sufficiently robust smart contracts, market capital that you'd want to be selecting from those that upper level where there are hundreds of possibilities. You wouldn't select the ones that weren't reputable and useful. But that would be a critical consideration, as well as how you would issue this is another thing that would take some thought and working with stakeholders and thinking it through. As mentioned, there are already a couple of stable coins in the world that get issued pursuant to smart contract releases, and then they're issued. You can go back and you basically quench the token and get your dollar back. So there's already a process that can be seen for these stable coins. It's worth discussion about whether that's the best process. And then you would potentially work with exchanges or others that already have commercial facing marketplace access to provide for that release.
Mr. Chairman, go ahead. Senator Roth, excuse me, and I apologize for really being ignorant on this stuff. Just trying to get an elementary understanding of how it works. But if somebody elected to purchase or to use the stable currency that's backed by the U.S. Treasury or whatever, then I don't know if it's a document or however that's illustrated. Then me as a holder of that stable currency, I could use that as collateral for other loans, or it's because it's backed by US dollar, it seems to me that it would have more credibility in other financial institutions. Am I getting this at all or not?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, you're exactly right. In fact, you can have collateralized loans right now with virtual currencies and cryptocurrencies that are volatile. You could do that tomorrow. There are financial instruments out there to do that. But now you would have an asset where you can verifiably indicate, yes, I have ownership of this asset. And you could, through a smart contract or even through a traditional contract, put up that asset as collateral. And since it's a US dollar, a representative of a US dollar, there would be confidence in the value of that.
You would have Mr. Chairman, I apologize. You'd have the capacity or the ability to sell that, and just thank you.
Yep.
That helps me.
And Mr. Chairman, not just sell it, you could redeem it directly with the state, but the transaction that would occur more often, because this is what happens right now, would be simply exchanging this for some other commodity, which might be a cryptocurrency or for a US dollar through an exchange. Mr. Chairman, committee, any further questions on that before I walk through the rest? No. Okay. Mr. Chairman, going back through, you see that the treasurer has flexibility to retain professional services, investment, to maintain, invest in, and reinvest the funds from the stable token that would be coming through the revenue, but we'll see that there's very tight consideration of how those can be. It's only treasury bills. It's explicitly only treasury bills, and even specifically bills. No flexibility on that by design, because that's a key to the confidence in it as being a stable token, as opposed to some type of coin, which might be volatile. On page 5, Romanet 5 may make and enter into any and all contracts, agreements, and arrangements, and retain, employ services of financial institutions and research, technical, and other services. So this provides that flexibility with financial institutions where the state may want to work with a state trust. The state may want to work with one of our special purpose depository institutions. They may want to work with a traditional bank. All of that, in terms of the framework for facilitating this, really needs to be explored as a part of this process to move it forward. But again, there are plenty of assets and resources available, but the stakeholders and the experts, as well as the partners that we want to take on, are going to have a vision of the best way to do it, that this is designed not to predispose us or pre-select us towards anything that wouldn't provide that flexibility. So that's the concept there.
Mr. Chairman. Senator Rothfuss, here on page 5, I do have a question about lines 5 through 9. And I think it's what you were just talking about. It seems to provide that the treasurer can enter into contracts and arrangements with financial institutions, maybe a speedy bank. So my question is how this relates to the immunity on page 9, lines 6 through 9. Okay, so I'm imagining a situation where the state treasurer issues the stable tokens. They then get processed by the speedy institution. And something goes wrong or the customer is unhappy, right? It seems that we have a real strong interest in having the state and the treasurer be immune from liability for anything that goes wrong. On page 9, the way it's worded right now, we have the treasurer and officials and employees of the treasurer are entitled to immunity from liability and so on. And the question is there any reason we wouldn't want to make that broader so that it's not just the treasurer who's immune and the employees, but the state itself and all state officials and employees?
Yeah,
And
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I have no objection to that. We do have a few other locations where we're trying to limit liability. We say that a few times, but if there's a structure that's more comfortable for you on that B paragraph that broadens it, it's certainly consistent with the intent of making sure that Wyoming is not on the hook for anything beyond what we've got in the trust account. End of obligations. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, moving back through Romanet 5 just indicates that may seek guidance from relevant federal agencies if desired, may select financial institution or financial institutions to manage the Wyoming stable tokens. Again, that level of management can be determined on an as-needed basis. Shall report annually to the committee regarding the implementation, operation, and performance of the Wyoming stable token account. And you see the creation of the Wyoming stable token account on page 6, where first of all, it's created and any revenue off of the investments of those funds will stay in that account. You see line 12 through 14, the state treasurer shall invest funds within the account exclusively in United States Treasury bills. And to be clear, that's going to be posted everywhere as often as possible, and it's going to be the basis for the stability of the stable token. It's going to be the basis for the conceptual surety on the folks that want to utilize it, that they know that this is a Treasury bill-backed reserve where the dollars are held in trust, and that's the basis for the confidence. So the dollar ownership remains, and it's essential to establish that trust to have a true stable token. So that's the conceptual basis of that.
So Chris,
Yes.
if I may, as I explained this to us yesterday, I was having a hard time connecting how revenue is generated through these transactions back to the state. I don't know if it's the interest gained or the interest gained on the investment revenue before it's redeemed or at the time of redeeming, or if there's a fee associated with it. He talked about a percentage of the value of the of what they're trying to secure. Can you,
Right.
And maybe now's not the time, but just help me understand that at some point.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, this is exactly the time. And again, so the Treasury bills will be held by the state, and there's no obligation on those Treasury bills by the token holder. The token is representative of a single US dollar. That's its ownership. So the Treasury bills, and Chief Investment Officer Fleming can certainly speak better to this, will be then dependent on the yields from the Treasury bills, since that'll be our investment mechanism. The expectation is 1% to 2% in the years ahead, which means if we have a substantial amount of dollars that we're holding, we'll be getting a 1% to 2%. I'll remind you the market cap is currently about $180 billion and expected to in the other two coins, and expected to grow dramatically to the point where we're not even competing with those other coins. There's a tremendous marketplace available. You could imagine a circumstance realistically where we'd have $10 billion that we were holding. I would love to have $100 billion we're holding, but 1% of either of those numbers is incredible. And to the extent that the risk is low, we might fail, but we don't fail and lose. We fail and simply don't gain, which is always a nice position to be in. And that's the beauty of this, is that we're only obligated for the dollars we're holding. And if somebody wants to come back to us and quench that token and redeem it for the dollar, that's fine. there's no transaction fee in either direction. They gain nothing, they lose nothing, dollar for dollar. And so that would be something the exchange would engage in, and exchanges typically charge on the order of 0.1% for that transaction, but we wouldn't be participating in that. That would be on the exchanger's side of the balance sheet.
But if they've invested that in a T-bill and then they come back, there's a maturity date. If there's maturity date on T-bill, they may come before that matures.
Correct.
So you've got that other fund out there, but the overall investment, you wouldn't capitalize on that return until that matures, right? Even though the transaction may have gone several different ways.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, that's exactly right. And the reality is the state as the issuer will not engage in very many transactions. We issue and then we hold. All of the transactions are over here. We don't do anything. Unless there's a reason that somebody, and that reason would candidly be if somehow Treasury bill rates went negative, which has never happened on a Treasury bill in the history of Treasury bills. But if it did, then people should come back and redeem, and they should cash out. We wouldn't lose anything because we're only obligated to the dollar value. So it would be a fully reserved cash out, and it would be fine. Nobody would panic. And then you see, though, in addition, Mr. Chairman and Representative Larson, that we reserve at 102% on page 6 in the B paragraph instead of 100% to provide additional confidence. We get the 2%, we own that 2% effectively, but the concept is we still want to make sure that we're always going to be able to give a dollar back for the dollar token. So if we reserve at 102%, even if in the incredibly unlikely situation T-bills go negative, we'll have a slight surplus available so that when people come back, then they can redeem, we'll give them their dollar. But as you see in that same paragraph, and then on to page 7, the redemption paragraph, it makes it very clear that the most we can possibly be on the hook for is the proportionate amount of the liquidation value of that account. So if somehow these T-bills went tragically negative in a very strange way, and let's say it was only valued at 80% of the initial value, then we would return 80 cents on the dollar as the liquidation value if somebody cashed in their token, which would be clearly spelled out in all of the terms and conditions. But it gets back to the confidence. This is so much more secure and has so much more integrity than the existing systems that are used for stable coins, that even though you see this much risk, if you're the person that is purchasing this coin and it's very small, you're going to look at this, you're going to compare it to other products, and you're going to probably be pretty happy with this approach. So, Mr. Chairman, you see further limitations, which indicates that there will be, once again, a clear indication that we won't be liable anything beyond the reserve account. We reiterate, as we discussed a moment ago, bottom of page 8 on to 9, the limitations of liability on the state. And I do appreciate the concepts of further limitation of liability if we can strengthen that language. Bottom of page 9 on to page 10. This is conforming amendments with an existing statute. Page 10 at the bottom in section 3 indicates that the state treasurer shall issue a Wyoming stable token not later than December 31st, 2022. B is an intentionally produced kickout valve, which indicates that if this runs into problems or challenges, that there's a pause button. If you run into statutory, whether that's federal or state challenges, the treasurer can push pause, but this is the subject of the amendment that Representative Yin brought forward, where in some discussion, it actually made more sense for the Attorney General to be the monitor of federal and state compliance to make that determination. So you see in the proposed amendment that it shifts it over to the AG as making a determination of whether we can or cannot issue the stable token, and then the pause would be put in place if not. And the intent of that pause then is they come back to CapFin, they would also come to the select committee and say, hey, we've run into these problems. we have challenges, and here they are. So we can address them if we can address them, and we would not if we could not. And Mr. Chairman, the only final point that I have is a little bit of a nuance. We discussed this the other day briefly, and I think everyone or many are aware of it, but you see it in Representative Yin's amendment as the first portion of the amendment, page 6, line 20, shall insert first be used to pay for the direct operational costs of this act. And then that is just a little change that, as structured right now, the revenue from the treasury bills has to fill the fund to 102% before that revenue can be used to pay for the administration of the act. That was an accident, frankly, but it rose as a concern. That should be 2 years or so. So it would be a problem for a couple of years to fund the act. The intent was to allow that revenue to pay for the direct costs of the act. So this switches that and allows for the revenue, not the principal, to be clear, but the revenue itself to be used to administer this act. And certainly that's important in the startup phase. We can get more nuanced after the startup phase. The expectation is that it's not going to take new personnel, but it might take expertise. And that would be my expectation of expenditures. So with that, this is something that we've had a lot of enthusiasm for. I don't know if we have our public comment. Nope, I think they're arriving around 1, but I will try and text them and expedite them out. Looks like they'll be here soon anyway. Oh, not just the chief information officer, but we have a couple of representatives of Tayson, which is a local. Yeah, Sean was here. I know he provided testimony, but the CEO of Tayson wanted to come and provide some testimony. Tayson's just down the road. They work in smart contracts, blockchain, cryptocurrency, and this is something that candidly they're quite enthusiastic about for the reasons I said, which is they would like to use a stable token that is fully dollar backed. They already use these stable coins quite a bit, but they feel a little bit more confident if they could work with something that had a government behind it and was auditable and transparent. So,
Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chris, this may be for you. This may be maybe more for Matt, but I'm curious, have we really looked into what the operational costs might be and what that might look like, and whether or not the treasurer's office has the folks to handle that?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Matt Sacco, State Treasurer's Office. I think that's a good question. I don't know. I think, as Senator Rothfuss alluded, I think a lot of this would be working with interested parties. We'd have to have some staff time dedicated to doing this, but we could handle it in-house. I think talking with CIO Fleming and Senator Rothfuss, we'd have a fair number of people, as Rothfuss indicated, volunteering their time to help move this forward. I think in the end, our biggest part of the program would be just investing the hopefully billions of dollars. So, yes. So I think the biggest part would be getting this moving forward and getting, the consultants, the contracts, those types of things ironed out. But I don't know what that might cost.
Mr. Chairman, follow up. Thank you. So I see the dates in here, and do we think that could be stood up relatively quickly? Do we feel confident in that? That could be for whoever wants it.
Mr. Chairman, we could stand up a stable coin in a week, but it wouldn't be as thoughtful as you'd want. So in terms of how long does it take to create one of these, you could issue a token this evening if you had the time, knowledge, and inclination. It's not a Herculean effort. The thing that's going to take some time is really thinking through what the appropriate institutional methodology is, with whom do we partner and that portion of the infrastructure is going to take some time, making sure we've got the right workflow in-house, right management. So from a technological standpoint, it isn't a challenge. There's no single piece of it that would be daunting to anybody that's familiar with this space. So that's where this timeline came from. It seemed very reasonable to get it done in that period of time, based on the fact that no individual component of it is particularly challenging, but maybe bringing together the pieces is going to take several months, rules and regulations, the kinds of things that we as government, like to ensure are taking place concurrent. So it is more the speed of government than the speed of business. It's certainly not a slow timeline, but that's the reason.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman. Senator Rothfuss, I have so the policy question. Let's imagine I'm a hardworking cultivator of coca, and I have a manufacturing plant where I produce cocaine. And usually I do my transactions in Bitcoin, but I don't like the volatility of that. I might want to use the Wyoming stable token. So tell me how that plays out and if there are any sort of unintended consequences of adopting this.
Well, if you were that enterprising individual and you hired me as an expert consultant, I would point you to several other cryptocurrencies that you should use and not a transparent open blockchain stable token like this, because all of the transactions will be publicly readable and available. So while you would begin as a pseudo-anonymous individual, you have a number and you would have to work pretty hard to obscure those numbers. You're much better off dealing with a briefcase full of cash, old school, or there are cryptocurrencies available that try to obscure that information, but this stable token is not intended to be structured that way as a public digital representation of the dollar. It honestly makes more sense certainly to start with something that is fully transparent and doesn't have those concerns. But get back to me if you need me.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, there's one thing I don't understand about what your explanation is. So if we issue 100 million stable tokens, they're backed by $1, and that dollar happens to reside in treasury bonds. So what is that reserve? How much? I mean, are we going to be doing $1 billion worth of transactions? Do we have to have $1 billion in T-bonds, or where? How big is that account, and what can we rely on it?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, and that might be a question for Mr. Sackett, but or Patrick. The reality though is that the T-bills are the holding of the assets that we're keeping in trust, because we can't hold $100 billion or $1 billion. We need to put it someplace. The most secure investment instrument, that we can contemplate is that T-bill. So you would simply be buying the entirety of your trust in T-bills, probably laddered in some way for time sliced, so that you had a tiny bit of rollover liquidity if you needed to cash out a small amount. There is provisions in the bill, though, which recognizes that the cashing in is pursuant to rule and regulation. We discussed this because if somebody wants to cash in a large estate for a large amount of dollars instantaneously, and there won't be any promise of that. The transactions, once you're in the cryptocurrency, will be relatively instantaneous, but the treasury bill transaction and liquidation will be subject to a little bit of a timeline that's based on the life of that treasury bill. So again, that'll be part of the terms and conditions of the product, which will be clear in the smart contract that dictates the product, which is basically if you need over $100 million, then you're going to be subject to maybe full repayment in a week. And I'm just being totally arbitrary on that, but that is something we discussed. So transactions, once you have them, getting on an exchange transaction or a person-to-person transaction will be nearly instantaneous. But if you have a tremendous redemption, that's going to be subject to the time that it takes to liquidate the treasury bills without paying early liquidation costs, because we're not going to pay those costs. And again, that's in there, and that would be rule and regulation concepts, but we discussed that as a possibility of risk.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Just to provide some clarity, all the state would be doing is issuing the stable tokens. It has no part in transaction. So it's for an analogy would be the state prints out a certificate that says this is a stable token that represents $1 in a T-bill, and we'll just give it to you if you give us $1, and then you can do whatever with the certificate you want. So we aren't handling any of the transactions. We just say you have a certificate that's worth $1, and this provides liquidity within virtual currency markets that is pegged to $1.
Mr. Chairman, so thank you. What would be your best guess as to the size of these transactions? We're not talking $50,000, right? Or could we be?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Kinner, it would be the equivalent of instantaneous financial transaction capacity. So any transaction that you would imagine, you know that $1 million transactions take place all the time. This would be a reasonable vehicle for a secure $1 million transaction that resolves nearly instantaneous. This is also a great vehicle for buying a cup of coffee if somebody wanted to use it, because the transaction fee would be less than 1/10%, where you compare that to a merchant service, which is going to bill you between 2 and 3%. So you have a 20-ish fold improvement on that transaction friction. So whether you're thinking wiring $1 million, this is going to be easier, faster, better, and more secure, or whether you're thinking buying the cup of coffee, this is going to be easier, faster, better, and more secure.
Mr. Chairman and Senator Rothfuss, so for us old fat guys here, we stick money someplace, we anticipate a little something back on that. They forego that because they're getting liquidity or security based on this dollar, and then we're capitalizing on the investment again and taking the return. That's where we get our money. They like it because it gives them the ability, flexibility, or mobile. Am I seeing that right?
You are saying that correctly. I will note one other thing, and then Mr. Co-Chairman has a follow-up on that. They can invest, you can bank crypto. Again, I can take cryptocurrency that I have, I can put it in a crypto bank, I can get a yield off of that.
Correct. And I understand that. But this transaction allows them to have a secure currency that then they could go invest other places, but we're going to capitalize on the return that we from our investment, correct? Okay.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, sometimes I don't know what's clear in my mind and not in others. So just trying to elaborate a little more, because there's the two parts of the transaction we keep talking about. One is on our side and one is what people are doing with these tokens on their end. And I think it just has to be really clear that a person on the other end who wants this token does not seek this token to invest or to sit on it, right? That's got to be really clear. It's exactly what Representative Larson is saying. It's for the ease of the transaction, the liquidity of the transaction. And I don't know if this is helpful, Mr. Chairman, for Representative Simpson, your question earlier on the T-bills. I think on that side of the transaction, I think the way that I read this statute, it tells us that a person may put $1 in and be issued a token, and that the stable token account is created and the dollar is held in the account. It doesn't automatically create the requirement that dollar be converted into a T-bill. I think we could probably make this language a little more clear, Mr. Chairman. It says on page 6, lines 12 through 14, it says the state treasurer shall invest funds within the account exclusively in UST bills. And the way I read that is that we're just putting that limitation on, you can't invest in anything else. I don't think it's saying you have to instantaneously invest, because obviously you have to have the reserve in the account. But I think that's important to look at on the side, on that side of the transaction, that all the treasurer is doing is issuing tokens and putting dollars in an account, and there will have to be an investment policy created inside the through rule and reg on exactly when we invest, right, and when we don't. So I don't know if that language needs to be more clear, but just making sure no one's stumbling on that, at least in my mind. I think that's the intent of that section.
Incorporated. We're based out of Cheyenne, Wyoming.
My name is, oh, there we go. My name is John Curtis Bugnacki. I'm the policy lead for Tassin Incorporated.
Okay. Thank you very much. I would first like to thank the legislature for this opportunity to speak today in support of the Wyoming Stable Token Act. By way of introduction, my name is Jay Yang, and I'm the CEO of Tassin, a blockchain consulting and software development company. When I decided to have our first physical location after 2 long years of remote work, I recognized the groundbreaking blockchain laws that were passed by this distinguished body. And as a result, I immediately moved to Wyoming last year, and it was quite a bit of setup, but it was good to go. And one of the things that really resonated with me is the value of the people of Wyoming, and I share that value. And I felt very confident about its future, and that's the reason why I'm here. Tassin has raised $20 million and employs 35 people, spanning half a dozen countries. Our biggest goal this year is to continue to grow our team at Cheyenne, at our headquarters in 211 West and 19th Street. We're very close. We currently employ 10 Cheyenne residents in roles ranging from software developers, marketing specialists, accountants, and IT professionals. We also encourage all employees to move to the state through the company's incentive policies. Moving forward, we're very enthusiastic about bringing high-paying jobs to the state and provide good and great opportunities for the state residents. I think that if this pardon me, I think that this bill represents an excellent opportunity for the state of Wyoming, both in terms of providing new opportunities to consumers and help companies like ourselves grow in the state and provide high-paying jobs to the residents. Wyoming has been at the cutting edge of the conversation when it comes to blockchain and crypto regulation. It was the first US state in 2020 to charter a special purpose depository institution, or SPDI, which are permitted to house cryptocurrencies along with fiat. It was the first US state in 2021 to recognize decentralized autonomous organizations, or DAO, and afford them the same rights as LLCs, or limited liability companies. It is this regulatory certainty and innovation for digital assets that was a main factor in headquartering our business here in Cheyenne. Wyoming is, and it's continuing to, Wyoming is continuing its history of digital innovations with this new act, which will create the first state stable token. A stable token is a digital currency that is linked to an underlying asset, such as national currency or precious metals, such as gold. Stable tokens are important because cryptocurrencies are a new asset class evolving rapidly in increasingly tech-driven economy. Many cryptocurrencies experience major volatility, which can change value in a matter of seconds. In contrast, stable tokens, a stable token is a type of cryptocurrency that's designed to maintain a fixed value that takes advantage of the power of the blockchain's distributed ledger technology while facilitating the use in everyday payments and transactions. However, many people in the state of Wyoming and the US are reluctant to use stable tokens, such as USDT, because they do not have confidence in the assets that stand behind them. There have been concerns with these other stable tokens because even though they have made greater strides towards transparency, many consumers are uncertain whether the companies offering them have enough reserves to back them and maintain their value. However, with the Wyoming stable token, consumers will know that they are backed 100% by US Treasury bills, pegged 1-to-1 to US dollar. Wyoming stable token will facilitate a new way of innovation and regulatory certainty that will drive more entrepreneurs like myself and other businesses to Wyoming, bringing high-paying jobs and economic diversification. For an example, Wyoming stablecoin would play a major part in our operation because it would take the place of other stable tokens that we use for payments and which do not have much transparency and certainty as the Wyoming stable token would have. In other words, this bill would be a major positive for our operation and those of other crypto companies as well. Of course, there are many issues to be finalized, but I'm confident that this bill provides an excellent framework to seek guidance from all relevant stakeholders in government and in industry. If this bill were to become law, it will help new capital formation in the state of Wyoming as entrepreneurs and startups will flock here. If this bill were to become law, we would be happy to offer our extensive expertise in crypto regulation and industry to work with the state to make sure that this stable token is a success. As other states seek to erode Wyoming's competitive advantage by copying its crypto-friendly laws, Wyoming needs to continue to lead in innovation and providing regulatory certainty to blockchain entrepreneurs. Legislations like Wyoming Stable Token Act is a major part of how Wyoming will continue to lead and attract new businesses like Tassin to the state. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you very much.
The discussions. So I've got a few questions.
Thank you.
So for whomever wants to answer, I'm not sure I understand why you need Wyoming to do this and why having Wyoming as the transactional agent provides more security or transparency.
So, Mr. Chairman, I guess there's probably a couple of different avenues to approach that. One, as the purchaser, what you're getting when you ask for the token is basically the full faith and credit of Wyoming and its stability and its name. It's a brand. Wyoming's a brand like any other.
But actually, you're not getting full.
Yeah, I was just gonna-
Yeah.
Just to
the
clarify on
opposite.
that, I think that's metaphorical rather than literal. Because you're explicitly not getting the full faith and credit of Wyoming, but yeah, no, Mr. Chairman, go on. I know what you're saying.
Not in the liability sense, as Representative Stith would appreciate, but I think that's why someone is attracted. They are attracted to the Wyoming name. What I'm building off of is absolutely the testimony you just heard, Mr. Chairman, which is all of the firsts in Wyoming, a company that is located here in downtown Cheyenne with 20 plus professional jobs is here because of that legislation and its interest in investing because of Wyoming's stance previously. So I think that's the first avenue of why someone wants to purchase it. So it's not a do nothing burger, if you will, Mr. Chairman, when it's stood up.
So, I mean, Bank of America could do it. Any other large institution that would have, would be just as secure with the same type of contract, buying T-bills or however you want to do it.
Pioneering, innovative, a first mover. Why Wyoming would not do it is the question. There's no risk and only revenue to gain. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But if it
Well,
does,
well,
there's revenue.
that's my other question is, you say there is no risk. And we can put it in the statute that there's no risk, but that doesn't mean necessarily that there's no risk.
Well, let's explore that question then. Let's explore what are the risks that are seen by the Joint Appropriations Committee. I know this isn't an opportunity for us to
I'll
ask
just
you
give you an
questions,
example.
but it is an opportunity to
Let's-
explore
let's-
this, right?
let's
Alleging
follow
that
up.
there is risk and we say that there isn't, let's help me answer your question by identifying what risks you
So-
potentially
So
see.
these will go on the open market. And you can, so in one day, one token can probably circle around and be traded 500 times, right? In one day, and then 500 times the next day. And then we find out that someone in Colombia is using Wyoming tokens as part of their cash reserves or to purchase a car or to run guns or whatever it is. We don't have any control of that.
So inherent to the blockchain technology is the fact that it can't be cloned. No Bitcoin has been cloned, and believe me, if anyone could clone a Bitcoin, they would have done it, because a Bitcoin is even today worth about $40,000. Zero clonings. Ethereum has not been cloned. That is the key advantage here, and it is in fact the value that provides the enthusiastic support for blockchain technology. So that risk is far greater in traditional banking than it
So
is in
I'm not talking
blockchain.
about cloning. I'm just talking about use.
Mr. Chairman, you're concerned about reputational integrity of the state of Wyoming having potential Wyoming token being used for criminal activity and being tainted, then our reputation being tainted with criminal activity. I guess we as Americans should have greater concern about Representative Stiff's suitcase full of cash for his cocaine operation, or where there are locations of suitcases full of US dollars throughout the world. So if we really want to take ownership over reputational integrity of our currency, I think we as Americans can go a long way with that. But I'm not sure that should be our primary concern, recognizing what we can do for the children of this state with the revenue that could be generated.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I think frankly, the stable token makes it easier for criminal justice to pursue bad actors because there is a transparent ledger that you can follow. And the federal government has been able to do that with cryptocurrencies, and with the stable token, they'll be able to do that as well. It provides an easier route for criminal justice to pursue bad actors than a basket full of cash or a briefcase full of cash. So I don't think that's a risk, and that transaction won't be with us. It'll be transactions with the piece of paper that we issue, the digital token that we issue that people transact.
So let's talk a little about this, the transaction page. So how do we assure that this transactional agent is, AAA rated, however you want to say it, if they are sued because of some type of malfeasance or glitch in their computer system, somehow gets upside down and there are losses?
Mr. Chairman, so because it's done on the blockchain, there isn't one transactional agent. It's an issue of a transaction to be accepted into the ledger of the chain, and then each node verifies whether that's a valid transaction or not and communicate with themselves on whether to accept that in the ledger that everyone accepts is the one truth of what's on it. If you lose money on the blockchain, there frankly isn't a way to get it back. And that's it.
And Mr. Chairman, I would just add what this bill doesn't contemplate, but which would be easy to add to it, is a third-party audit mechanism. As Representative Yin can look at the blockchain and fully understand the transactions on it. I don't know if the individuals in the treasurer's office, or we hand this over to the attorney general's office, can do that. I think it would be really easy to employ a third-party audit for those, whatever the verification purposes that you're interested in on the blockchain, because you would be needing to contract likely out to an outside entity to look at that give you your report, tell you what it says in non-code.
Mr. Chairman, just to follow on that, and every single blockchain transaction for Bitcoin, as an example, that has ever taken place, you could look up right now. It's freely available. It's copied in multitudes because that's literally how the blockchain works, and that's how Bitcoin works. If you want to go back to the first 5 transactions, you can see who gave whom what, and it takes no time to search that because there are millions of copies of that identical blockchain. That's the core of the technology. And that's the value that people are looking for when they want to be able to use a US dollar in this way. They want those strengths. And that's the value that we're trying to provide. Why can't a bank do this? Well, you know, candidly, the 2 coins that are stable coins out there are effectively that. It was organizations that came together and issued a stable coin. And there, for both of them, has been some question, one perhaps more than the other, about the assets that back it. In fact, at one point in time, the federal government, the US federal government, froze a significant amount of one of the coin's assets because it happened to be in a bank that was frozen, which led to some turmoil, you can imagine, which is part of the reason why the best stable token, which would be this stable token, would just be backed fully and completely by T-bills.
So if you're backing it by T-bills and then there's a run on the token, and if the T-bills are time sensitive, so what happens if you can't catch up? I mean, so you're signing a contract that says you get the token, but it's only redeemable at the leisure or the pleasure of what state of Wyoming can, the treasurer's office can do in terms of turning over those T-bills.
So that is what's in statute, is that you're going to have to go with our timeline. I will say that 99+% of all transactions would never involve Wyoming. So if you want to sell, you would be selling to someone else. There's open markets, again, with the 2 existing stable coins, hundreds of millions, billions of dollars worth of transactions every day take place. And only a small fraction of them are with the issuers. That's the same circumstance here. Now, if there is a run, it would be under the circumstance that I suggested, which is that treasury bills go negative, which is why we've got this 2%. You can imagine if treasury bills were to go even, we'll say arbitrarily, -1%, that'll never happen. Let's pretend it does for a moment. It goes -1%. That means it's 1/12% per month. So with a 2% pad, you've got 24 months of time before the reserve in the trust can't pay back on a dollar for dollar. That's the purpose of that 2%, is to ensure that you have a landing field, a runway that is just really, really long, so that the danger of a run, it's not going to look like, you know, the 1918 or 1919, where everyone panics and there aren't enough dollars to go around. There are exactly the right number of dollars to go around plus 2%. And they won't be going anywhere for a long, long time. As long as you can get back to the state within a couple of years to cash back out, you should get every one of your dollars. But if somehow you can't do that, then maybe you get 0.99 back, which is really pretty good. If you're in a situation where, you know, as I've had some conversations, if we're in a situation where our treasury bills go negative, I don't think we're going to be very worried about this legislation. We're going to have other things that are going on that we're much more worried about.
So, you know, if we are creating a trust, we're holding the T-bills on behalf of the token holders, then we automatically create a fiduciary duty between the state and that other person. I mean, that's under current law. And that's probably under federal law as well. So I don't know that we have the ability to fully immunize ourselves because of that fiduciary obligation.
Mr. Chairman, are we holding it for them, or is that just what we invested?
It's,
It's
that,
supported, yes.
I'm reading this as held on
and
behalf.
And I guess that's the question, because I didn't see us as they buy that and we just back it. We back it with the T-bills. It's not that they come and they claim this, go into this account and bring the T-bill back. It's just the value that we have with the T-bill. So can you help us
Yeah,
reconciliate or?
go ahead, Senator.
So let's explore that. Let's assume there is a fiduciary duty. I don't concede that there is one perhaps, but if there is, what's the concern with having a fiduciary duty?
Well, because those fiduciary duties outline our obligations to the holder of that token.
Correct. And so what would the concern be? Well, you're concerned about
Well,
risk.
that's my question is,
Yeah,
why I'm posing it is what can.
due to the blockchain.
I mean, to me, we're not experts, but I can tell you that there's a lot of smart people out there who manipulate it anything they can, any way they can. If there's a way to do it.
Mr. Chairman, if I might, I think your point is a valid one, and the sort of this handwritten amendment, I think, might address that we just lock down the immunity of the state so tight that there's just no liability ever, period. And that's the risk that the Wyoming staple token holders have, that they can't ever sue the state for money. I think that'd be the fix, because I think it's probably true. We don't know everything that could go wrong. A lot of things could go wrong. I assume that the financial transaction, the market maker for this, whoever's dealing in this and trading them, things might go wrong, or there might be a dispute. They may claim that they gave us money when they didn't give us money, because I assume that for the treasurer to issue $1 of token, the treasurer has to actually get a real dollar.
So it may be useful that all we do is account to the financial man of the token, not the token holder. It's really two different things. So on page 6, line 10 and 11, instead of the financial demands of the holder, it would be the financial demands of the token, on the token.
Say page 6, line 10. Okay.
10, yeah, and 11. So strike holder, basically.
Mr. Chairman, I would suggest it on line 9 as well.
I could be on a different version. I'm not on the blue copy.
Oh, in the blue cup.
Anyway, just a food for thought on that, because that makes more, that reduces an individual, because all we do is protect the token itself and pay it back on a call.
Mr. Chairman, I agree. I think the only obligation that the state has is on redemption, that the certificate that they redeem is worth the $1.
So my next question is, basically, this is a generic bill to get this thing off the ground and running. And as you talked about, the structure and the transactional folks and the rules and regs will be put together by the treasurer. It seems to me that we got the cart before the horse. And that is that the treasurer should put this program together, demonstrate and show us what it is, what it's going to look like, what he's going to need, the time and personnel. You come to us and say, here's what we're going to do. Instead of saying, here, treasurer, you go do it and report to us a year later. That doesn't make any sense. So give me your thoughts on that.
Mr. Chairman, I am concerned about that, and it comes to first mover advantage and the fact that someone can do this. It's, there's a first place, and there's probably then a bunch of second place losers, et cetera. The advantage, and you heard this in the testimony, is that we are being the innovators. This framework provides the structure that's needed to move it forward. and the flexibility to allow that to move forward and to bring in stakeholders to provide the support for that flexibility. That's the type of teamwork environment where you don't need a lot of resources, you don't need an RFP, you don't need a lot of bureaucracy, and you don't need an incredible amount of time because you'll have the goodwill of the community like we heard today. If we go to the old school, this is how states do things, bureaucracy, where we study it for a few years, slow roll it, and then we're, you know, the fourth, the fourth release of a stable token, which is probably not very useful at that point in time. We can do that, but it'll cost us more and we'll get no value out of it. So I don't see it working if we do the slow, methodical, state-like approach, which is honestly what the federal government is slowly doing. And honestly, those big banks you mentioned, what they're very slowly doing, they'll get there eventually.
Well, just the counter to that is, if it's that big of a deal, if you think that we're going to make hundreds of millions of dollars and you got the treasurer behind you, you could have it done in 2 months. And then come and show us what you've got and how it's going to work and get a sign off on it from somebody on how we do it. You've got here, the treasurer can hire anybody he wants at any cost. Just go do it. And is that what we want to do as a supervising oversight of this project, is saying, treasurer, go get an expert, go get an accountant, go hire 3 folks, 10 folks, 20 folks. There's just no sideboards at all.
I think the sideboards are that, you know, there's no ask for an appropriations bill. And there was discussion about the fact that we're going to rely on goodwill. I don't think we can outspend the state and bankrupt the budget through goodwill. I hope not. If we were asking for a $10 million appropriation to go hire all of the people you just mentioned, I think that would be a
Well, let's rephrase the question.
Concern.
Who would the treasurer have to hire in order to do what you're asking him to do?
Mr. Chairman, I think that depends on who is willing to step forward and provide their services and how things start to come together. I would think it would be useful for the treasurer to hire somebody who is an independent expert in this space on behalf of the treasurer's office to provide eyes, to be thoughtful from the state's perspective and protect state interests. Almost like we did on the capital projects, Chairman, where we had our owner's rep, so to speak. Something along those lines would potentially be valuable. But beyond that, I think either the work gets done through stakeholder goodwill or it doesn't get done is probably how it would go.
So on page 5, you had Romanet 7 on mine. It's annual reports. So I'm just curious, that doesn't make any sense to me. Why would we wait a year to get a report? Because we have no idea what's going on in the meantime.
Mr. Chairman, you can have as many reports as you'd like. I'm open to an amendment on that. If you want monthly reports, I'll give them a call on every Friday evening if you'd like. Not averse to more reports if you would like to hear more reports.
So has the treasurer's office contemplated who and what you'll need in order to start this up?
Mr. Chairman, Patrick Fleming, CIO for the Treasurer's Office.
By the way, I still have your Christmas present in my garage.
Next year. Mr. Chairman, from the investment perspective, this is something that we could do internally. In the last testimony, we were talking about the ability to buy treasury bills, which would be very, very easy to do. So from that perspective, we don't see that there is a need for anyone. The other aspect of it is we do have summer interns that we have the money to be able to hire those individuals. And Senator Rothfuss has mentioned just people at the university who would be more than eager to help work in that area. So from the investment side of it, we do not see that would be a big lift. And why we're here, I would like to comment on your JP Morgan or any other bank from entering into this. One thing I just want everyone to realize is that this would be disintermediation of the banking sector. This is not something that the banks would want to see happen. As I mentioned before, the cost of letter of credit transfers, this is the part that they would fight tooth and nail against, which for us would be an advantage because many of the US legislature with a very, very strong lobbying group will push very hard about stablecoin usage. And so from our perspective, yes, they could do that, but that would cannibalize part of their interests. JP Morgan right now does have an equivalent of a coin, but it's just for the type of smart contracts, the things that we talked about, but it's only for JP Morgan customers and so forth. So this is growing, but anyone could start it, and that's the part of the first mover advantage that we feel is very, very important. And I'll pass over to Matt as far as any of the other office type of individuals we might need.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, we're not contemplating any kind of staff hires. I think as Senator Rothfuss said, we'd have people donating time and working with it, and we have capacity within the office to do that. We did propose to you guys an amendment yesterday, and one of the issues was potentially no sideboards on that. And Senator Rothfuss proposed an amendment, which I haven't seen. It seemed like it something to help prepay, which would then be paid back. If you put a cap on that of 100,000 or something, I think that would be well within what we would envision. I think there is some unknowns on how big this could go, but if it got that big, we would be generating, hundreds of millions of dollars with little staff, and the investment team can do that as he said easily. So I guess with no staff, we might need, as Senator Rothfuss said, some eyes to help guide this, but that could be done probably, I would say, for $100,000 or less if you guys are worried about extreme expenditures or something.
Mr. Chairman, one other comment that you made about if something happened with the T-bills or what have you, how would we then liquidate those? And that is something that we had discussed before. In that instance, we wouldn't go out in long dated T-bills until you had to cash that 102% buffer, what have you. But that is one of the reasons why the legislators put in that the value of the fund. So in the instance that you had a bunch of T-bills and rates went up dramatically, and then all of a sudden you had a massive move to liquidate the currencies, you would have to then go out and liquidate T-bills. In that event, those T-bills would be worth less than what you had purchased. But in the bill, they stated the value of the fund is what would be redeemed at that time. So there would be an interest where you would like break the buck in the money market parlance if something like that would happen. But it's as you know, T-bills, the volatility of T-bills are so low that it would be highly unlikely that valuation difference would be dramatic.
Other questions? Please.
Mr. Chairman, Lisa Jurdy Spillman, General Counsel for the State Treasurer's Office. With respect to your question about the sideboards, I just wanted to mention that the State Treasurer's Office would abide all other contracting law. This law does provide for entering into a contract as well as making sure that whatever we do, we check with the U.S. Treasury Department and follow any other federal IRS and other requirements. So the sideboards that our office would be required to employ are that which we employ already. The procurement law where we have to competitively negotiate, so we wouldn't just cherry pick one contractor. And in addition, all of our contracts need Attorney General approval. So we would need to make sure that they understand this bill, they understand exactly what we're looking for, and that approval is given.
Thank you. Questions for Lisa? Okay. Any further questions? Any other testimony? Okay. Any online comments? Okay, with that, we'll close public comment. What's your pleasure? Moved by Representative Walters, seconded by Representative Larson. Amendments,
Mr. Chairman,
please.
I would move the amendment substantially in the form as set forth in handwriting in front of you. On page 9, line 6. And if I can get a second for that, I can explain the purpose. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, so the purpose of the amendment would be to broaden the immunity provision on page 9 so that it's not just the treasurer who's immune, but everybody in the state's immune. So for example, not just the state treasurer, but say the state auditor, for example, who might otherwise be a defendant in a lawsuit about some transaction that went wrong. So as amended, it would read, the state officials and its employees are entitled to immunity from liability, including defense, under the Wyoming Governmental Claims Act in connection with any contract or transaction involving or related to Wyoming stable tokens. So, and you'll note that I've deleted the words and indemnification. And the only reason I do that is because it's weird to both grant immunity and then say you're going to indemnify the person. Because if you've got immunity, then there is no issue of indemnification. If you want to leave indemnification, I don't care, but I don't want some judge or someone to get confused and think that because we have the word indemnification, there must be some potential for some exception to immunity. However, if you are immune, you still want to be defended, right? In other words, if someone sues you and you have immunity, you still have costs of defense. So I think including the defense piece of that makes sense. And then, so that's the amendment. There might be certain grammatical changes. It's a bit clunky to say the state officials and its employees. Maybe it's state officials and state employees. However, it needs to be written so that the government, state officials, all the employees are absolutely immune, regardless of what happens.
The only part, there ought to be some component of the indemnification. If, for example, one of the transactional companies turns around and sues the state of Wyoming, what would cover indemnification plus attorney's fees and costs?
And yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy if we leave in the indemnification. It doesn't bother me. It's just that I want the immunity to be so strong that they can't even sue us on a contract. I mean, this would be like, the most you can do is get rid of mandamus to make us do what we're supposed to do.
Yes, your sole remedy is to redeem the token.
Right.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Seeing this amendment and hearing Representative Stiff's amendment, I don't know the wisdom of keeping reference to the Wyoming Governmental Claims Act because that actually limits the scope of immunity to just simply those claims under the act, which claims can actually be beyond the act. So I would strike that.
Mr. Chairman, I would regard that as a friendly amendment to delete the phrase under the Wyoming Governmental Claims Act. I think that's definitely a friendly amendment to the amendment.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
would the committee consider to add comfort that no fiduciary duty is created by virtue of these tokens? Something to that effect. Just make that statement. Address that concern that you might have.
I would include it in this language. It just makes more sense. Go ahead.
And I think all these are great ideas, honestly. And whatever the best language is that you can all come up with to make that clear. All of that would go into effectively what you would contemplate as the prospectus for the token and would be clear as the terms and conditions of that token. So you can incorporate that into the smart contract that governs the token. And that is truly then the contract that governs the token under Wyoming statute. So there's some nice features based on previous law we put in place that would allow that to really be a strong statement. I don't know if this is perfect language, but I'm sure you'll work on it in additional readings or whatever the case may be if it needs remedy.
And Mr. Chairman, I might say with respect to no fiduciary duty being created, you might want to put that on page 6, since that's the page that talks about creating a trust fund.
Okay, back to the amendment. Now what's it say?
As amended, I believe the language on page 9, starting at line 6, would read, the state officials, and state employees are entitled to immunity from liability, including defense, in connection with any contract or transaction involving or related to Wyoming stable tokens. It's a bit clunky. The including defense is a bit clunky. Under this act.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, that motion carries. Any other amendments?
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
I move the proposed Representative Yin amendment that we have on our desk.
Which one is it? This one. Go ahead. Representative Yen, tell us what this is, what it says.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So there are two parts. One is the one part on page 6, which is to ensure that the revenues can pay any operational costs if necessary first, before the rest would tip over. And then on page 10, it just ensures that the Attorney General is the one that decides lawfulness, because I think that is the right place to put that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So do we need to get another Attorney General to have the expertise to do this? Okay, any discussion on the amendment? Representative Schwartz.
I'm just wondering, because we've got operational costs being inserted, and then we're still covering the operational costs out of the 102. The way I'm reading it. Line 23 on page 6. I mean, we can pay him twice. That's fine.
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think Representative Schwartz is right that we probably need to delete it in that instance because it might create some confusion if we have it there again. So you just want the pour over above account funds in excess of 100%. Be expended. Do you have it?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Yeah, so I would propose that you would amend the amendment to strike the second version where it's the excess of 102%. And so,
Give us the reference, please, Mike.
so on page 6, line 23, shall be expended to pay for the operational costs of this act with any remainder being distributed evenly. So I would,
I've got it.
I would.
Mr. Chairman. You'd strike on page 6, line 23, be expended to pay, actually leave the B in place. That'll save the next part. Delete expended to pay for the operational costs of this act with any remainder being, and leave the rest. So, Mr. Chairman, at that point, that line would read, of the notional value of all outstanding issued Wyoming stable tokens shall be distributed evenly, comma, on an annual basis, et cetera. So it just takes out the repeat of the language.
You have that, Mary Lee? Mr. Chairman, I consider that a friendly addition to the amendment.
Okay, further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? So what's the purpose of an annual basis? Why wouldn't it be at the discretion of no less than an annual base or no more than annual?
It could, Mr. Chairman, it could easily be quarterly. I don't know. I mean, ask the treasurer on that one if they care what that would be. Maybe Patrick has a concept. Distributed. When the revenue is distributed to the Common School Permanent Land Fund and the Permanent Environmental Trust Fund.
Mr. Chairman, we distribute to the various funds on a monthly basis right now, which is an operational pain. So if it would be possible to go something longer than a month, I think that would be ideal. But anything other than that from, I'm speaking on behalf of Katie and the crew, so I'm hoping that I'm
Theoretically,
not
that
speaking out
problem
of
would be
turn.
gone soon.
But if it would be a month, we are right now looking at extending that out to at least a quarterly basis because of the operational difficulties of doing monthly distributions.
Okay. We have an amendment.
Mr. Chairman, I would,
Wait a minute, explain that. Where are you?
He'll make the amendment. Go ahead. Tom.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not going to make that amendment because I think
Come on.
annual is fine. I'm going to make another amendment on page 11, line 4, and this is really in the treasurer's office. And it's the one that the treasurer's office gave us yesterday, and this would say a new subsection B there at the top of the page. And it would say the state treasurer is authorized to expend up to 100,000 general fund to effectuate the provisions of this act. These funds will be repaid to the treasurer pursuant to statute 40-31-105B.
Discussion. Comments.
The purpose is just to give them some upfront operational authority to get this up and running. And then the fund will pay itself back. So it's a net zero to the state in time.
Okay, everyone understand the amendment? Discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carried.
Who seconded it? Okay.
So
And you will get me that language? please?
on page 5, line 19 on mine, it says shall report annually, and I would move to change that to quarterly. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? That motion carries. Go ahead.
On that, I'm sorry, I think I heard the wrong page and line number.
Yes.
Will you repeat that?
Page 7.
I have it on page 7. I think so. I think you were looking at the wrong timeline, unless you
Well, I'm on,
want the other one.
I'm on, I think, an older version of the bill.
You're talking about reporting.
You're talking about the reporting. You want the reporting, not the,
Correct.
my apologies. I thought you were talking about the
That's
the
my
funds.
next, that's my next amendment.
Gotcha. Understood. Thank you.
So let's go to that one, line 7, page 7, line 2. I would move that we change annually to quarterly. Yeah.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
That motion carried. So I've got about 2 or 3 different more complicated amendments. So what I need to do is kind of get this bill wrapped up, and then I'll have them typed up and I'll ship them over to you guys so you can see them. And I want to do that before we kick this out, so everyone sees it, because it'll be a lot easier to do it here than on the floor.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Representative Stiff.
one final amendment I would move on page 6, line 14, to add a new sentence that says the state officials and state employees shall have no fiduciary duty to token holders.
Okay. Is there a second? Second, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, that motion carried.
Mr. Chairman,
Well, I'll send it up then to you with where it's bogged down. Okay, anything else?
Mr. Chairman, just with the short timeline we have left in the session, I think it would be responsible of us to pass this out today and bring those amendments that you're suggesting as committee of the whole amendments.
I don't think so. I want to see the bill.
Question on it?
I've tabled the bill. It's tabled till tomorrow. So we can't vote on it now. So I'll get the amendments to you as quick as I can. With that, we'll stand adjourned till, when's our next meeting? Sometime tomorrow.
Mary Lee, when are we tomorrow?
Tomorrow's Friday. We have first thing in the morning.
First thing in the morning.
We have
Mr.
the room
Chairman?
first thing.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, my select water committee members are getting really nervous about Senate File 80, which is the construction omnibus bill. I would request we bring that forward to tomorrow's agenda, please.
Mike, so could you? Could you put together, like a
Rolled, whatever.
yeah, essentially like a substitute one that just has everything in it.
I mean, I don't have all the words. That were just
I'll just work with Mary Lee, she'll have it. So we got to talk more about this before we skip. So it's interesting because one, we're competing with private industry. And I think there's a good constitution. In essence, we are creating a concept backed up by
Well, fair enough, get that, get that answer. I don't. We can keep. Just give them the service, provide them, we do.
So what do we do with the language on treasure? I'm just gonna strike it.